but we are going to record.
And I'm going to record it also if I have permission.
Agari Prabhu, can you give him permission? Can you make him the host?
Or co-host, so we both record.
Yeah. Can you make him co-host?
Yes, I'll make you the host.
Or co-host is better.
Okay, can you try now, Prabhu?
Okay. It's working. It's recording. We're on.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna do the introductions. Prabhus, whomever is still logging on, please put the video on. It's nice to see faces. So I'm gonna give a small bio of Sriman Brahmatirtha Prabhu. Brahmatirtha met the devotees when he was a Peace Corps science teacher in Bihar, India in 1971-72. He had gone to India to study the Bhagavad Gita and to find out if Hare Krishna was bona fide. He then had the good fortune of meeting Srila Prabhupada at the first Mayapur festival. Srila Prabhupada changed his life by convincing him that good association is the key to spiritual life. He has taken that principle seriously ever since then. It was initiated in Houston in 1976. Currently, Brahmatirtha is the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, something Prabhupada was extremely fond of, co-director of ISKCON Resolve, and on the board of directors of the Bhakti Center in New York. In the past, he was on the board of directors of New Brahmatirtha when there were only 10 devotees living there. I was one of them, actually. He has also been on the board of directors of the Krishna House, a former Gurukula headmaster, a former BBT division director, as well as a life membership director. He is a certified court mediator, as well as a licensed professional geologist. And if you care to look on the, on the upper left of my computer, you can see Bhakti Cohen, his wife. So say hello to Bhakti. There you go. So Brahmatirtha Prabhu, thank you for being with us. And this is going to be a slightly different format. Usually we let the speakers give a lecture or give a class or talk about whatever topic we are addressing, or we choose a topic for them, or it is a Bhagavatam class. But in this case, Brahmatirtha is a very interesting character. He had a lot of direct association with Srila Prabhupada, as he ended up one-on-one with Prabhupada day after day in that little hut in Mayapur, a very, very amazing place. So please tell us, first of all, why did you become a Peace Corps worker, and how did you end up in India? Why not somewhere else? Did you choose to go to India?
Yes. First, I'll begin by saying why I'm doing a little different style. I like speaking to the audience I'm speaking to. And so I've been doing some classes and more interviews. And I find that this way I'm getting to be interacting with what the devotees I'm speaking to are really interested in, as opposed to, especially when I don't know the community, about what I'm just guessing. I might add another connection of mine to Gita Nagari is Satsarup Maharaj was visiting. He was my GBC around 77 time period, and 78. In that time frame, he visited and he had dinner at my extremely humble apartment, but he had dinner. And he then said he's doing a traveling party and wanted some Gaur-Nitai deities. So I took our uninstalled deities off the altar, and Bhakti and I handed it to him and said, these are yours. So those became his traveling deities, which are now the installed Chota Gaur-Nitai at Gita Nagari. And I just want to share that story with you. So I have deep connections with Gita Nagari. I had 2 kids in the Gurukula there during the Burijan days. And my son had the distinction of being the #1 thief from the Yogi Bar factory. So I have many good connections and memories of Gita Nagari. So it's a pleasure to be there with you while I sit here at 75 degrees in Florida.
Is this the same kid that became a cop?
Yes. Yeah. Remember, the difference between a cop and a criminal sometimes is where they sleep at night, but he's a good cop.
So tell us, you said you chose to go to India as a Peace Corps. You had the choice.
Yeah. Well, in the Peace Corps, they ask you for 3 choices of countries, and they try to satisfy your choice. It was very hard to get in the Peace Corps during those days, many more applicants and slots. But if one would be chosen and they asked for India, they would get India because it was considered the worst assignment by experienced Peace Corps volunteers. The African assignments for example, were a lot less austere than the India assignments, even though Africa was considered at that time less advanced materially. It was actually much better. So, and of all the assignments in India, I got an unusual one. We'll get to that. And so I had put in my 3 choices for the Peace Corps. I put India, and you can guess what the 3rd one was, because the only way I'd ever go to the Peace Corps if they gave me India, because I wanted to go to India since I was a little boy, and I did not want to go as a tourist. I wanted to go looking at it from the inside out. The Gita had fascinated me. That's not when I was a little boy, but I was in high school and college. Had really fascinated me. Prabhupada's Gita wasn't out, but I read others, and I had to understand the origin of it. Plus, in New York in the 60s, after Prabhupada came, there was a wave of gurus started going to India. They understood, Prabhupada beat the wave. He understood somehow by Paramatma that it was the right time to come. And then when he started getting successful, and he was the first one to really be successful, you had Guru Maharajji and Maharishi Yogi and coming among others. And how was one to know who was an op from a bona fide ancient tradition, which is what I wanted? Well, the only way I'd find out is to fulfill my long desire to go to India. So I applied to India, and I'd forgotten I had applied to India, because if you remember the 60s, then you really weren't there. And some of the younger folks may not get that, but we'll explain that if we need to. And I had forgotten I had applied, and just before I graduated college, I received the letter for the Peace Corps. You've been accepted for India, and report for duty within a month. And it was a big shocker to me.
Now you were a hydrogeologist, so
yeah. So
your business was to go there and act as a hydrogeologist, or
no. I wasn't. My degree then was chemistry. I hadn't even gotten my geology degree. I was going there as a high school science teacher, mostly in-service training for Indian teachers. And those who know India, there is a very backward state in India, the most backward state, and that's Bihar.
And one of the poorest too.
Say that again?
one of the poorest as well.
It's poor, it's caste conscious, it's the prime minister, former chief minister, was just sentenced to another 5 years in jail for stealing, I think it was $50 million from the state treasury. When he was ousted at one point, his wife became the chief minister, and she could only sign her name with an X. I mean, it's an odd place. It's where the Buddha received his enlightenment, has a great history. Many great sadhus have come from there. But in the current state of affairs, it was considered backwards. Of all the places in Bihar, South Bihar, which is now Jharkhand state, is even more backwards. It was Adivasi tribal territory, a lot of strife between various groups. You have the Christians, the Hindus, the Muslims, the tribals. And I was assigned there. It was the best assignment I could ever get in the Peace Corps. #1 assignment. I could not have gotten a better assignment because it was the closest assignment to Calcutta, where it turns out the devotees were. And it was I was very attached to India for various reasons. And it was the one place in India where there was no chance of that attachment capturing me. You cannot become attached to the place I was assigned. It's not possible.
Now, how did you make your way to Mayapur? How did you meet the devotees? Have you met devotees before in America?
Yes, I went to 26 Second Avenue because I had seen Jayadvaita Swami, Brahmatirtha then, in a party chanting in the village. And I thought these are either the biggest exhibitionists or they're above it all. I didn't know which. But to stand in a bedsheet with a tambourine and opposite colored socks, you either have to be very detached, which I admired, or a bigger exhibitionist than the many exhibitionists who inhabited the village in those days. So I was curious which. And then I got a mantra card, which I promptly lost. But the Hair album came out, so I learned the mantra from Hair, and I just liked it. I still like it. It's a wonderful mantra. So I learned the mantra, went to 26 Second Avenue when I finally found out where they were. There was no Googling locations, and they had moved to 61 Second Avenue, and they didn't put a sign in the window. It took me 6 months to find out where they moved. Finally, I went to 61 Second Avenue. I'm going to find out who you guys are, what it's about. And they'd moved to 439 Henry Street. That took me another 6 months. When I finally met them, I was like entering another world. There was incense and deities and everything was so different. But I had no idea what the philosophy was. So I said, I'd like to buy a book. Well, if I'm asking to buy a book, no one's going to argue with me. So they sold me the one book they actually had in stock then, Nectar of Devotion. Try making that your first book. It's an adventure. It's a real adventure. So I couldn't make heads or tails, but I was still intrigued. So that was my introduction to the devotees. I would occasionally, when I was upstate New York at school, but I was down in the city area. Sometimes I would visit a few times, but I couldn't figure it out. And then the letter came accepting me in the Peace Corps, and a month later, I was on the way to India. When I landed in India, I had a deja vu moment because when the Pan Am 747 landed after 32 hours flying up and down, I thought I'd be too spaced out to be numb, but I wasn't. The plane was surrounded by hordes of these giant flying cockroaches. They had enlarged the airport And in doing so, he created an ecological mess. And when the flight attendant walked down, there were no jet bridges, of course, then walked down the steps, she started screaming and yelling. She's the one that goes there every week. And as soon as I hit the tarmac, I felt like I was home. So there was something strange about that, and nice. And I knew I had come here for a reason. But I had explored the temples and the mosques and churches, and I asked people, what do you do? Why are you here? What's it about? And I'd always get the same answer. They considered their religious experience equivalent of Amazon.com. You put in your punya points and you expect a delivery the next day to your house. And it was a very disappointing experience. After several weeks of Hindi training in New Delhi, they sent all of us off on our own to tour the countryside and go to a town, buy a bus ticket, go to a town, stay overnight, visit a school, and come back alive. Okay, so they sent me to the town of Tanasur. Didn't know what Tanasur was. I bet none of you know what Tanasur is. Anybody know where Tanasur is? All of you know, but you know it by a different name. The name you know it by is Kurukshetra. That's the name of the bus station. The train station's Kurukshetra. So I had no idea. So I get off the bus. It was about almost within a week or two of when Radhanath Swami went there in Journey Home. We just missed each other. And when I got off the bus, there was a giant temple there, and the temple in the shape of a chariot. So I understood right away I was actually on the Gita's battlefield. Wow. So then I went to the University of Kurukshetra, went into the student union, and I was mobbed, surrounded by students, because you never see a clean-cut Western person showing up in those days. Any Westerners my age were all hippies. And Peace Corps had given me the appropriate haircut before I left, mandatory. So I was a clean-cut American, and they mobbed me, bought me a milkshake. They really wanted to meet me. And I asked them one question. I said, do you or anybody you know chant Hare Krishna? I wanted to know, was this something made up or was it bona fide? The answer I received was disappointing, but understandable now. He said, Krishna, we don't care about Krishna. This was just before the India-Pakistan war. They said, we want to know why Nixon is out to get us, because Nixon favored Pakistan and the Soviet Union favored India. And so I left Kurukshetra in a disappointed state. Then when I got assigned to Bihar, I would take an overnight train to Calcutta just to take a little break in a city. I had very little money, but the train was 25 cents, so I could do that. And I saw Giriraj Brahmachari speaking. I saw a sign, Hare Krishna Festival. I went to the festival, and it was the first time I'd been in India many months. I, some degree, spoke the language. I knew the culture. And there was somebody speaking, actually making philosophical sense. I still remember his talk to this day. And then I said, this is good. This is very, very interesting. And then I went to visit the temple, same temple we have now. And on my second visit there, Prabhupada was actually there. So somebody said, would you like to meet Prabhupada? Well, I'd heard enough about Prabhupada where I went in with a large amount of respect. And it was just a room with mats on it and covered in sheets, and Prabhupada behind a low desk, no Vyasa-san or anything like that. And so Prabhupada said, so you have any questions? So I asked a really stupid question. It was a good thing I did that because it made me gun shy to ask more stupid questions. And I had just come from Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha received enlightenment. I sat under an alleged sapling from the original tree, and I sat there, and obviously nothing happened. So I'm not the Buddha. But anyway, I asked him, I said, well, why, you're taking the Hindu path, why not the Buddhist path? Prabhupada refused to discuss isms. If I said I'm coming from a Jewish or Christian background, he's never going to comment. He's going to say, or rarely comment, he'll typically say, so what's your philosophy? So immediately, Prabhupada understood I was a little philosophical. So immediately he said to me, well, what did the Buddha say? He wanted to discuss not an ism, but a philosophy. So I muttered, well, fourfold this and eightfold that, or was it fourfold this and eightfold the other thing? And I'm mumbling and jumbling and this nonsense. I couldn't say anything coherent. Finally, I turned to him and said, I don't know. And he said to me, so why are you asking? And then I shut up. I zipped it. I said, I'm just going to sit there and listen, which is what I did.
Lucky it didn't make it into the book.
Well, that was in Calcutta, and that wasn't recorded. I did, there's a BTG, the next issue of BTG is an article that discusses these points. And there'll be a new introduction to the book I'm working on that discusses these points, because many devotees ask me, and so they're entitled to know. And apparently, to my utter shock, the book's in 58 languages. So it's just a strange phenomenon. I personally can't relate to it. For about 35, 40 years, I refused to speak on the book. It just, I'll reveal my mind. Somebody asked me, I talked to them. It wasn't like I zipped it, but I was afraid as the book got more and more languages, if I spoke on it, I would think it's about me, not Prabhupada, and would hurt my own spiritual life. So I kind of made my own position not to speak. And then as the COVID came, so many people asked me, you got to tell the story. So I said, okay, devotees are asking, I'll do it. And it turns out it is about Prabhupada. It's not about me. And I could have spoken on it all these years. So be it.
Let me tell a little story here. In 1985, I don't think we traveled together to India, but we actually met in Calcutta and traveled together to Mayapur. And there was a devotee at the reception, and then I think it was the long building, and maybe one other building was in construction. And we went to reception to register ourselves. And when he asked the British devotee that was there behind the desk, asked, what's your name? And he said, my name is Bob Cohen. And the guy dropped the pen and said, the Bob Cohen? The perfect questions, perfect answers guy? You said, yes. He said, you made me a devotee. And I remember you said, no, Prabhupada made you a devotee. If you remember correctly, I'm the idiot that was asking the questions.
I see it that way. Prabhupada was able to take whatever I asked because I did really want to know, and I did have a sincere desire. I had an unusual childhood, and it really prepared me for meeting Prabhupada, because in one way, I was ahead of my years in certain aspect of life due to a childhood matter. And that was able to make me more prepared. And Prabhupada, Krishna says in the Gita, approach a spiritual master, inquire submissively, render service, and then the truth can come. So accidentally, I hit the formula because after my first question in Calcutta, I was determined not to repeat that one again. And then I went to Mayapur, not even knowing Prabhupada was there. Devotees said they're doing food relief for Bangladesh refugees. the war had just ended a month before. And so we're right on the border. So I said, sure, I have a break from teaching. I'd love to do that. And I was rendering service. I was inquiring submissively, and I hit the formula. It's called lucky.
Not so lucky. In a conversation that Professor Suthers from Ohio State had with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in the 20s, the professor was a little challenging in the beginning, asking questions, imagining that he was meeting some aboriginal shaman, not a guru of the caliber of Bhaktisiddhanta. Today happens to be his appearance, so it's a good day to tell this. And eventually it got so sophisticated. The philosophy that Bhaktisiddhanta was speaking was so above his pay grade that he had to say, I hear you, and I'm not sure I understand every concept. I seem to, so can you tell me more? And Bhaktisiddhanta stopped them and said, no, if you want to learn more, you have to become my disciple. That was his stopping point. So he was inquiring, but not submissively. That's why you got the mercy. You were doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about it, I met Prabhupada 50 years after he met Bhaktisiddhanta. And it's now 50 years after I met Prabhupada. It's a kind of a shocking number to think about.
So tell us, what was your, when I read the book Miracle on Second Avenue by Mukunda Maharaj, it was a different book, other recollections of disciples that I've read before. Because in the beginning, Mukunda Maharaj didn't see Prabhupada as the founder Acharya, Paramahamsa, savior of the whole world, whatever, Shakti Vishavatar, all the accolades of Prabhupada, saw him as a Swami, as an old person from India that had a message to deliver. And then eventually his understanding and his appreciation for Prabhupada and his love for Prabhupada grew to quite an amazing extent, that as it happened for everybody else. How was your experience? When you had your first meeting with Prabhupada, how did you feel? And after talk, what was your perspective after all that?
Well, that's a nice question. By the way, Miracle on Second Avenue is one of my all-time favorite books of that genre. Absolutely. One piece missing in Perfect Questions is the first conversation I had in Mayapur. Now, to put this in context, I got off the boat. I took a train to Navadvip and then took the boat across the river. I ran into another devotee traveling, so somebody knew how to get there. And when I got off the boat, there was Tejas. And Tejas had been a Peace Corps worker in India. And he saw another non-hippie American showing up. He immediately greeted me. We're still friends. And he took me in to see Prabhupada. When I went in to see Prabhupada, I had known what happened, my last incident. I said, I'm here just to be a good listener, which was really set my mindset in a good frame of mind. There was 60, 70 devotees there, most of them well under 25 years old, all extremely enthusiastic. And there was one English-speaking guest. So Prabhupada understood it, and our first conversation was unfortunately not recorded, because the book begins where we left off after the first conversation. But the conversation began in a very normal way. Prabhupada greeted me. I mentioned I'd been to Calcutta. What am I doing? I'm a science teacher here and there. And it was a very a normal introduction. You know, the book unfortunately doesn't begin there. After that conversation, Shama Sundar, who had a shortage of cassette tapes, so he was very parsimonious in what he recorded, said, "This is interesting." And he hit the record button, unbeknownst to me, fine with me. And he started recording. So the book begins not at the beginning of our conversation in Mayapur. It begins with the second conversation. And then Prabhupada made me feel very, very relaxed. He was on a low platform. I sat on a mat on the floor. And somehow I always kept my gaze at his feet, which were, I just had to look slightly down and there was his feet. Don't know why I did it, but I did it. And I thought there was only three of us in the room, myself, Shama Sundar, and Prabhupada. Later on, I hear from many devotees, the whole doorway was full of heads. They were there. The room was actually quite full. It was a little smaller room than now. You know, the Bhajan Kutir gets washed away in each flood and they rebuild it. Now it's similar. And Chutananda had actually built that for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada just so captured my attention, but made me feel very comfortable, made me feel relaxed. And he kind of probed. And then something very, very mysterious happened. So mystical that to this day, it still bewilders me. When I was studying the Gita in college, under a very competent Professor John Kohler, we were using Dr. Radha Krishna's Gita in English, no Sanskrit. I don't know any Sanskrit. I had questioned Professor Kohler on one verse, apichet sudarshano, even if one commits some most abominable activities, because most student activists in those days, we were all digital thinkers. It's either yes or no. We had very little shades of gray. We had no appreciation for somebody else's point of view. And that was quite problematic. We just didn't think that way at all. So here you have a verse saying that someone is a sinner, yet they're also a saint. And that really struck me as made no sense to me. So I asked the professor to explain it. And I remember him saying to me, "It is intuitively obvious," which is his highfalutin way of saying he has no idea whatsoever what it means. He was clueless. So I let that drop, didn't meditate on that verse, didn't think about it. And then Prabhupada quotes a verse to Sanskrit, the very first one he quotes to me. And he turns to me, and I didn't know any Sanskrit, and that was clear. And he turns to me and goes, "So you know this?" And it was the only verse I knew in English, the very first one he quotes to me. That, and weirdly enough, it's the last one he quotes to me. And oddly enough, I do ISKCON Resolve, and we have to live by that verse. So Krishna was very funny trick Krishna played there with that verse. It didn't hit me at first. It took me a little while later to realize the mystical thing that happened. So that's a little of the background.
So I am not sure I'm satisfied with the answer to my question, which is, how did you feel between the first meeting and the last meeting? Did anything change, grew, modified?
Yeah, things changed because of one of the most wonderful people that ever walked on the planet. And that's the wonderful Yamuna. There was hardly a person who was more loving, open-hearted, kind, Krishna conscious that I have met. And after I had like 3 sessions with Prabhupada, maybe more, It was Gaur Purnima. There was no electricity where we were, little generator sometimes, but no electricity. There were no shops at Mayapur. You couldn't buy anything. I mean, it was very austere. And just rice paddies with some tents on it. And it was full moon, clear night. And Yamuna came walking up to me, and she had tears in her eyes, and the tears were reflecting the moonlight. And she started saying to me, "You are so fortunate. You know, Prabhupada's not spending this much time with anybody anymore. That was only in the early days. You know, I was apparently the last one that Prabhupada joining spent a lot of time with until Bhakti True Swami came, you know, in early 77. But by then, Prabhupada had thousands of disciples, and this must happen. He had a bubble around him. I just happened to be at the right place. So she's telling me how fortunate I am and how interesting it is and how lucky that Prabhupada, I was serving prasadam all day. I'd get a note, Prabhupada wants to see you 3-4 times a day. And I'd give up my serving place and go to his hut. She said, "You're so lucky." And after she walked away, so fortunate, not lucky, fortunate. After she walked away, I went behind the pandal and just started crying. Oh my God, what's happening to me? What's happening? Am I going to lose all my attachments? And the next day, Prabhupada called me in, and I said, "Prabhupada, thank you so much for answering all my questions and being so nice and helping me, blah, blah, whatever I was saying. And I have to leave now." Prabhupada said, "Leave? Do not talk L-E-A-V-E. Talk L-I-V-E. And he says, "So you want me to stay longer?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "Then I'll stay." And then he goes, "Good boy." And when he said good boy, I knew I was his dog. Just like for those of you who have pet dogs, I do, the dog behaves, you go, "Good boy." And when he said good boy, I knew I was his pet, and I knew that was it. Now, formally, things happened much later. And then our whole conversation changed. The conversation up to that point was very theoretical. As I had mentioned, I had grown up with some disability, so I couldn't play ball or do things other kids did. So I read and thought a lot, especially about, are we this body or not? It was a big topic for me in my mind. So then when I met Prabhupada, it was a chance to express these theoretical questions. But Prabhupada knew better. And after this incident with Yamuna, the discussion became very personal. And it became, what do I personally need to do to advance my consciousness, not talk about theoretical concepts of God? And Prabhupada very subtly and effectively changed the conversation. And then after that, I knew as his follower. And then he wrote me a letter afterwards. And in the letter, he repeated the same magical words he had said before. And he said in the letter, "You're a good boy." And others might not have understood the purport of what he said. When I got that letter, I understood what he's saying is, I'm his dog. And I have to be loyal to my master, which I've been ever since. So that's in my own mind how I saw it. And afterwards, I would see Prabhupada at various times, and he would give me a lot of encouragement.
Did you have any conversations with other devotees during that time?
Sure. There were many. If a devotee had joined the movement 2 weeks before or 4 years before, which would be the longest anyone could be there, 4 years would be the most senior of all, I could not tell the difference. They all had the same bed sheet and clay marks. I couldn't tell the difference. And it's not that if somebody's in a movement 4 years, their socks start matching. It didn't happen. So how can I didn't know. So one devotee came up to me and preached so heavy. I had a cold and I was taking, just over-the-counter cold medicine that anyone would take, the equivalent of an Alka-Seltzer or something. And he preached to me what Maya this was, and I should only do Ayurvedic, and I'm killing myself. And the next devotee walks up to me and says, gee, I heard you have some cold medicine. Can I have a pill? So that's what it was like. And there were some strange devotees, but Yadavar and Vishaka were there. He had been in the Peace Corps in Indonesia or Malaysia, around that part of the world. He was mature. Vishaka was mature. They were actually a couple who liked each other. And so they gave me a sense of normalcy because I was engaged to be married before I went to India. So they gave me that sense of normalcy. And they were really nice. Giriraj Brahmatirtha then was really nice, but he was very busy running around, didn't get much time with him. And so, and all the devotees, you might say, as the joke goes, looked alike to me. So it's hard to tell who was who or who was what. I try to keep to myself and just do my seva. And then Prabhupada kept calling me in the hut. And when he'd call me in the hut, I'd say, oh, I can't leave. We had assembly line for serving. I said, I have my position. I have to, and they said, don't worry about it. Somebody will cover you. I said, okay. I was actually just trying to do my duty.
Did you have any kind of sadhana at the time? Did Prabhupada encourage you in that way?
Well, everyone had sadhana there. I mean, you wake up early if you like it or not. And there's no electricity, you go to bed early if you like it or not. But Prabhupada didn't discuss, it was interesting, your question, because I was surrounded by piles of should. Now, many of you, have you ever been up to your neck in should? Because every devotee was telling me what I should do. And these are the various shoulds. Somebody would say the whole secret is walking around Tulsi. The whole secret is chanting. The whole secret is offering your food. The whole secret is really reading the books. The whole secret is getting up at 2 a.m. Each devotee would tell me their own personal secret as if it's universally applicable to everyone. It was a Kantian moral imperative. So I was surrounded by moral imperatives. My head was spinning in circles. So after I went back to Calcutta a few weeks after Mayapur Fest was over, and Prabhupada happened to be there. So I got some more one-on-one time, not recorded, unfortunately. So I asked him the question, what do I do? Couldn't do everything. What do I actually do? I'm not fully surrendered. I'm going back to America. I'm getting married, this, that. What do I actually do? And so Prabhupada gave me a piece of advice. That's the best advice I've ever received. And I explained to him very briefly my dilemma, but immediately understood it. And he told me the secret. It was really a lot easier than I thought. It was sadhu sangha. He said, just get good association, and sadhana and the regulated devotional service, vidhi, bhakti, they all naturally follow. So just get good, keep good association. And that was his instruction to me. At that point, I realized my Peace Corps buddies, though we got along well, they were nice people on one hand, they weren't good association for me. So I hightailed it back to America.
Were you chanting at the time?
Oh, I was chanting since 1968, since I heard the Harinam festival. Not on beads. I didn't chant on beads till probably, until after Mayapur. But I was chanting wherever I was. Whatever I did, I was just always, whenever I just spontaneously, I was chanting a lot. I wasn't counting rounds, but I was chanting. But after that first Harinam festival, you know how you get a song in your mind and it won't leave no matter what you do? That's what happened to me. It got stuck. It's still stuck.
Well, fortunate you are, as Jamuna would say. Tell me, when you went back to America and met with your girlfriend, what did you tell her?
Oh, this was a quite shocking time for her because she had no idea. We couldn't, phone calls from India didn't work in those days. There were no satellites, very, very difficult, very, very expensive. It would take a month's salary and I'd have to yell so loud, we wouldn't need the phone. So I think I made one phone call and it really didn't work. So we correspond. And I had told her that I met a guru and we had this great adventure. But before that, she knew that I was, I wasn't into heavy drugs, but I sure had hash browns every morning for breakfast. And so some of my letters were a stream of consciousness. So when I wrote, because I'd completely sobered up, you might say, after I met Prabhupada, I really didn't want to be stoned in India, but I was with other Americans and there was either that or SWAT mosquitoes, it seemed. So when I wrote her that I'd met this guru, we sat under in a hut on the bank of the Ganges, blah, blah, blah. She thought I really must have escalated whatever I was taking to the really heavy stuff. And so she had no idea. But then she met Prabhupada. And when I came back, I still know, it's advice I give others, never, never preach to your spouse. It's about the dumbest thing anyone can do. You just don't do it. It's like Prabhupada says, you don't twist somebody's arm behind their back and go, do you love me? Do you love me? You just don't do that. So I knew not to, but I wanted to go to the temple and she wanted to be with her fiance, then husband, so she'd go with me. And she met Prabhupada. Now, when she met Prabhupada, it gave her a real transformation moment. And it was very funny when she met Prabhupada, because for me, Prabhupada's Bengali accent was nothing. I lived in India. I could understand 99%. For her, she had never in her life heard an Indian accent, especially a Bengali Indian accent. So she asked Prabhupada a question and he answers in perfect English. And she has a deer in the headlight look in her eyes. And Prabhupada turns to me and goes, translate. And she's on, she can speak for herself, but Prabhupada really affected her heart. And then there was, I have to add this. Some of the devotees in New York then were very kindly, and some of them were very heavy. And I wondered, it was unusual for somebody to be becoming a devotee and not move in an ashram. But I had an apartment and I was in graduate school. That was double weird. But I was chanting 16 rounds, I was following, I was doing various service, but it was a little strange. So some of the devotees would really get on my case, you might say. Hey, why don't you give up? We'll get you a nice devotee wife, or move in the ashram, or whatever they were saying. And there was one couple who was particularly nice, and they'd invite us over for dinner all the time, never judging, just kind, and just won us both over with their kindness and love. And he just passed on, sadly. That was Madhusudana and his wife, Kanchanbala. She's alive, but he died 2 days ago of COVID. And then there were other devotees who were really nice to us. Gopal Krishna Grahasta, then I used to go, his wife would pack lunch, and he was working for Clairol, which is an odd place for a devotee to work. We don't care about hair very much, but he worked for the Clairol. And so I'd meet him every other week for lunch at his desk. And so there's some devotees who are really, really nice to me, and some who really will leave that alone.
Did you ever think about just giving up your lifestyle and moving with the Bhakti, now your wife, to the temple?
We almost went to Iran in 1974. One of our best friends was a Treya Rishi, and that was when the Shah was still there. And he had got transferred to Iran with his accounting firm. And Dayananda went, and other friends of ours had gone. And we were really considering, because we were so close to these families, of going to Iran. And I wouldn't live in a temple in New York. I'd stay overnight there, but I couldn't sleep a wink. I'm a light sleeper, and it's just impossible. And we considered, but she was pregnant, and we decided that we didn't want to have a kid in a foreign country. But after that, after graduate school, I had a Krishna yoga club in graduate school. I was doing a lot of things, but many devotees were on my case that, you know, you ought to be more surrendered. Not everyone. And I was feeling very, very depressed about it, that maybe there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? Why can't I be a normal devotee or whatever? And then Prabhupada was visiting Henry Street in Brooklyn. And I decided I didn't want Prabhupada to see my face. So when he walked down the hall, I hid in a corner to offer obeisances where he couldn't see me. And then I'd just sit in the doorway of the temple room. Somehow Prabhupada saw me. I don't know how, because I was on the floor in the corner. And he waited until I finished the prayer, which I intentionally said slow so the entourage would walk by. I stood up. There was Prabhupada 1 inch from me, waiting for me. Goes, good to see you. And then he did something that he usually didn't do, gave me a fairly good sized hug. And that was Krishna telling me, steady on the path, you're doing the right thing. That was Krishna directly telling me. And that similar circumstances happened 2 more times. So that's how Krishna kind of, in the heart, knew what I needed and gave me that little extra push.
I have more things to ask of you, but perhaps we should open it up for other devotees. I want to tell also that Brahmatirtha, Prabhu, and his wife Bhakti have been instrumental in my spiritual life, as they became my surrogate spiritual parents throughout my long stint as a brahmachari. They received me with, well, Bhakti wasn't judgmental, Brahmatirtha was. So they received me quite nicely. And I used to cook for their kids and themselves. And yeah, I spent I actually, when I was running the preaching center in Gainesville, I think I spent more time at their house than I spent in their own center, the center we had. And they have been doing that for other people. My own wife, Divya, she's also a byproduct of their kindness and friendship. So let's now open up.
But one comment first, just to be fair, Sarvatma and Divyananda, we knew them both separately, and then they got together. And they have been our dearest friends for, coming close to 40 years now. And Sarvatma has been one of the most effective, stalwart outreach devotees who knows the art of making friends. And he can do it through ping pong, he can do it through prasadam, he can do it through philosophy. And that is a rare ability. And Divyananda, who actually took initiation in our house in Ohio in the mid-'80s, she epitomizes what it takes, how sincerity can overcome all obstacles. And she's had a lot of obstacles in the bumpy royal road, and her sincerity always wins the day. And frankly, they as a couple are often an inspiration for me when I run into, as we all do in devotional service, our ups and downs. They're an inspiration for me. I just pray they never have a down when I'm down, because they're the ones that always keep me up. So to continue, Sarvatma.
Thank you. I'll send a donation.
Oh, by the way, I want to add one thing. I am speaking not from my house. You can see where I'm speaking from. This is the new world headquarters for the Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. This is our main library room. And we have 8,000 book library to begin with, many, many rare books. And we just finished our second in-person hybrid Zoom seminar on cosmology. We did one in December on mind-brain interface. And so I just want to point out that I'm broadcasting from what I hope will be an historically important place for ISKCON.
I was speaking with Akandadi Prabhu today in Wales, and he agreed to do one of these lectures, one of these talks. I may do an interview, probably not. We decided on April's 1st to be his day to speak, April's Fool's Day. And he's going to say, we decided the title of the lecture will be, Is Science Making Fools Out of Us? And I suspected that it wasn't your home, because there are too many books and you're semi-illiterate, as I
exactly
correct.
Yeah, and we would not have a BI without a Kandadi. It's his cool-headed brilliance that makes our BI actually work, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. We were going drifting, and then he came and spent some weeks with us, and it got us on course. Is about 3 years ago. Now we have, I don't know, maybe 50 PhDs working with us. It's never been like that before.
This is wonderful. Okay, let's get to the nitty-gritty. Please, devotees, raise your hands or raise a virtual hand, and I'll please dispense of the formalities. Just ask a question so we don't spend too much time, and hear from Brahmatirtha Prabhu. Any hands?
I see one hand, but it's sewing, it's not raising. Okay, maybe Bhakti has a question. Could be, when are you going to be home already? Bhakti, did you want to add anything?
There's a question. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bhakti, if you want to add something, that'll be nice. Okay, actually, I do want to hear Bhakti's version of meeting Prabhupada, but Sahadev Prabhu has a question for you. Go ahead, unmute yourself. And please,
Nice to see you again.
Hare Krishna, thank
I'm
you.
really glad to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you and nice to hear from you again. Hare Krishna. I just wanted to find out if you could send us a link to the Sangha you were talking about that you just had a Zoom discourse. Some of us might be interested in participating.
In the Bhaktivedanta Institute?
Yes, where you said you discussed cosmology.
It's in the chat.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it's right there in the chat. We're adding to the webpage all the time. If you fill out the contact form, we'll put you on our mailing list. We mail out every quarter about 1,000 PDF newsletters. So feel free to take a look at that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sahadev, and very good to see you again.
Very good to see you too. I hope we have you sometime next month on our forum.
You might, I can't keep track, but I hope so. I've always enjoyed it quite a bit, being in your forum.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
So let's hear from Bhakti. Please, Bhakti, unmute yourself and let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
So when Brahmatirtha came back from India, you got that dream consciousness letter, and you thought the guy who you knew was no longer the same, and now he told it to you in person and described Prabhupada. What was your feeling? What was your understanding? What did you think?
Honestly, I didn't know what to think. It was so strange, the whole thing. And then I remember the first time he took me to the temple in Brooklyn on Henry Street. It was the most amazing part of that was the wafting incense was wonderful. The all of the different spices combined was wonderful. And I remember there were many times that my husband would say, I'm going to the temple on Sunday. Do you want to go? And I would say no. And he would ask me an hour before, I'm leaving in an hour. Do you want to go? I'd say no. And then maybe a half an hour later, he'd say, are you sure you don't want to? No, I don't want to go. And then 5 minutes before he left, I'd say, all right, I'll go. And then I would go, and I always engaged in service. I really enjoyed doing service, but the devotees, many of them were very judgmental, that I wouldn't say Hare Krishna, that I wouldn't move in the temple, that I didn't want to read the books. And that was hard for me. I was alone a lot, but there were a very select few devotees who were among the most kind people. As my husband mentioned, Madhusudan and Kanchambala were the most kind-hearted people and accepted me for who I was, as I was. And they made Krishna consciousness palatable. And then when I did get to meet Prabhupada in person, I remember I was outside Prabhupada's door waiting with my husband, and Atreya Rishi, who was a GBC and our dear, dear friend, said, now when you go in to meet Prabhupada, you offer your obeisances. And I said, no, sir, I don't offer my obeisances to anyone. And he said, okay. And as we walked into the room, my husband offered his obeisances. I bowed down to Prabhupada, not to the floor, and walked right to the back of the room. And it was a long room. And Prabhupada was so kind and so accepting. He didn't try to change me. He didn't tell me about all the rules and the regulations. And I'll tell you, when at one point, some devotee brought in a huge bowl of these white balls, and they looked like golf balls, and I couldn't imagine what Prabhupada would do with golf balls on his desk. But anyway, Prabhupada called me up to his desk from way across the room. So I got up and I walked before him, and he said, hold out your hand. And I understood that. So I held out my left hand. And he didn't say, no, you dummy. He just said, other hand. So I held out my right hand. And in it, he put one of those balls. But the ball wasn't dry. It was very drippy. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what to do with it. So Prabhupada motioned to me like this. And I thought, how is this thing going to fit in my mouth? But I did what he said. And if anyone has ever eaten a rasgulla, and when you bite down, it squeaks on your teeth, and the sweetness in it, it just, when Prabhupada saw my face, he burst out laughing. It was such a sweet exchange. And he was so kind. And then at the end of that exchange, it was time for Prabhupada to leave. And so I just didn't know what I could say to thank Prabhupada for his kindness upon me, which was not deserved. And I made sure I was the last person to go. So when everybody else filed out, I turned to Prabhupada, I folded up my hands and I said, Srila Prabhupada, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Keep in mind, that was the first time I'd said Hare Krishna, to which Prabhupada responded, Jai, just like that, because he knew. So that exchange has sustained me all these 50 years.
That is wonderful, Bhakti.
He is wonderful.
And so are you.
Oh, Sarvatma. I love you, Sarvatma, even in spite of your behavior, but that's okay.
Thank you, I
You're
guess.
just one of the boys.
So let's hear if any of you have any more questions for Brahmatirtha Prabhu.
The topics I typically talk on are obviously in the 50th anniversary, perfect questions. I also run the Ask a Nerd column for the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And I am co-director of ISKCON Resolve. And our motto is, welcome to ISKCON Resolve, just get over it. Okay.
I have a question about that, the ISKCON Resolve, if you don't mind my asking.
No.
As a mediator, and first I want to give a little bit of credentials to Bhakti. She's a licensed counselor and a mediator, et cetera, et cetera. She's very qualified, both materially and spiritually. So I'm not suggesting you call her with your problems, but I'm just saying she is very qualified. As a mediator, you're supposed to be completely neutral. Is that correct? Please explain how, let's say there is a conflict between two devotees, and these two devotees, one is very senior and the other one is much more junior, let's say, and you think that, because of your experience and because of your understanding, because of a Siddhanta, that the junior person is correct and the other one is incorrect. So how do you manage to break through? How do you manage to remain impartial? How do you manage to tell the truth? All these things seem to be very difficult to juggle at the same time. Is there a way that you can enlighten us or how you do these things?
That's an extremely important question. First thing is, if any of you have ever taken, has one of you taken the implicit bias test from Harvard? You can raise your hand. Everyone should take it. Oh, we have one. Devaki Preeti took it, and Abraham Stokes took it, and Sahadev took it. Very good. You cannot take the implicit bias test and pass it. It's very clever. Every one of us will have bias. It began as racial issues, and it goes into every kind of bias possible, be it gender issues or national origin issues or handicapped issues, whatever. Nobody is without some bias. Let's say I walk into a mediation, we'll take it outside the devotee field for a moment. And I've done this in court hundreds of times. Somebody walks in, they don't smell very good, they haven't shaved, and they're slovenly, and somebody else is in suit and tie with freshly shined shoes. Obviously, my mind is going to be prejudiced. The guy with the freshly shined shoes is probably lying between his teeth, but whatever. My mind is going to have some prejudice. The job of a mediator is not to pretend we're neutral. It's to notice, as we say in modern terms, mindful, notice our biases and not act on them. So that's the key. The second principle is when we're in a mediation situation, we balance the power. So if some devotee is some big shot, some devotee is some little shot, I balance the power to make sure they each get equal time, because we treat everyone with equal respect. That's a principle of mediation. A third thing is our job is not to judge. We're not trying to empower someone for a solution. So we're not trying to empower them with a solution. We're trying to empower them to come up with their own solution. We may seed some ideas, but the idea is that we're not the judge. So we balance power, understand our own biases so we don't act on them, and treat all parties with equal respect. I've been in circumstances where somebody's very junior and somebody very senior is there. And as you would guess, Sarvatma Prabhu, it can be a challenge for me. And I have to, I go through at least a week of training every year in mediation to keep the skills up to speed. It's a constant learning curve. I hope that answers your question.
It does. However, do you enter that type of dialogue with an understanding that mediation, the result of the mediation is binding, and does everybody follow that? Once they hear,
it's voluntary. Let's say there's a dispute and we come to an agreement. 80% of the time we mediate, we find that we come to an agreement everyone can live with. That's a little better than outside of the devotee world. 80, 90%. Outside the world, it might be 60 to 70. Then we find 80 to 90% of the time, when the parties voluntarily make an agreement, they stick to it. There are exceptions. Some people are of low character and their word means nothing. That can happen. Somebody changes their mind with buyer's regret. So when I come up with a mediated agreement, I don't rush the parties to sign it. I say, why don't you think about it for a day? I don't want buyer's regret. Sometimes I have to mediate. I've done this in a movement where one of the parties has some mental illness. That's much more challenging and much more difficult because they don't even know what they're thinking. And in a case like that, therapy is more appropriate than mediation. And some people are welcome that news and some people can't stand to hear that news. It's never boring. We are, those of us who do ISKCON Resolve, we are the porta potty of ISKCON.
well, you're doing a fantastic job, and I'm a first-hand witness of that.
Sometimes it doesn't. I've made enough mistakes of my 20 years of doing it, so I learned something.
Sahadev Prabhu?
Sahadev always has a nice question for me. Always.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Prabhuji. I must say, I had raised up my hand before you asked that question about that exam, so I haven't taken that exam yet. That's why. But if you may permit me, I have two questions.
Sure.
And the first question is, I hope and pray that you are not aware of what I'm going to be asking you about. And if you should ask me to tell you, I'm sorry to say, I will not be able to tell you. But
Okay.
the question is, in today's world where we have access to spewing out information, whether it is true or false, and everybody grabs it here and there, there is some, how should I say it? There are some people, not just ordinary people, but devotees, who speak so much ill of you. And of all the complaints and allegations they level against you that I have read, they are all false. But my question is, how do you develop the mindset and the thick skin to absorb all these false allegations and accusations while you are doing everything in your humble attempt to serve Sri Prabhupada?
Yeah.
That's my first question.
Yeah. I got inoculated against this. And you know, I'm obviously a pro-vaxxer here, and I'm still alive to prove it. So in the 70s, we had the biggest craziness ever I've seen in ISKCON in New York, in which the temple president, who had been a sannyas, who got married, Prabhupada performed the wedding, and he had married this crazy lady somehow. She had every bad quality. I mean, I can't think of a good quality she had. And he married her, and eventually devotees, once every week, a devotee was coming to our apartment, leaving the temple, and trying to find another temple to go to. And I was watching this. I think I'm a bhakta, and Prabhupada told me to, even if I have any questions, see this senior devotee. Was a very good man, but got bewildered. And then the lady started offering unmentionable foodstuffs to Radha Govinda. I mean, unmentionable foodstuff. I won't even say what it is. Just so horrible. And I'm watching this go on, just like, I'm a bhakta. What's going on here? And then I saw three devotees stood and blocked the doorway from the temple president's wife. You are not allowed back in. And Prabhupada praised them, made two of them GBCs, Treya and Gopal Krishna then, Rahastas, and Prabhupada made them GBCs. Prabhupada dealt with it very intelligently. And those devotees who blocked the door, he praised. Those senior people who stood by while the nonsense went on without doing anything, Prabhupada chastised. Those ordinary devotees who just followed, knew it was Maya, but followed, Prabhupada appreciated that. So Prabhupada dealt with everybody as individuals. That gave me a vaccine against ever being disturbed by anything else that happened in the movement. Now, almost all the personal attacks against me I've seen, there's not that many. A lot of people get attacked a lot more than me, but evolve around one issue. There was Arnold Zach, who was our mediator trainer. He went, very world famous mediator, went to Mayapur twice to convince the GBC we ought to open ISKCON Resolve. He's a wonderful person. He always said, when you get to child protection issue, all rationality goes away. I felt very strongly, and I still do, and I speak up about it, that the CPO has dealt very improperly. For example, in the Lakshmi Moni case, I've never once said, is she innocent or guilty? I've never opined on that. Yet I'm accused of opining on that, and I'm accused of, I felt that the process upon which the decision was made was grossly unfair. And I say it loudly, and I don't really care if somebody doesn't like it that I say that. I really don't care anymore, because I have a vaccine that prevents me from disturbing my faith in Krishna. And in 1990, I was a vice president of a mid-sized environmental firm. And I won a very large contract with the state government in Florida. Very, very large. So I had to go and be the lobbyist for the company in front of the legislature about matters related to it. And I knew nothing about lobbying in a government. So I had one of the senior lobbyists mentor me. How do you do this? I mean, the crazy place here at the Capitol. And he turns to me and he goes, son, do you have thick skin? I said, I don't know. He said, well, you better if you're going to be here, because people are going to say the most horrible things about you that aren't true just because they're opposed to what you think, and they'll attack you. So I learned to get some really thick skin. So I have thick skin now. When I see some of these things on the internet about me, it hurts. It hurts me a lot more when I see it about my godbrothers unfairly attacked for things that they never said or did or anything wrong. When I see it, it really hurts, because it's so Vaishnav. It's such the wrong way to have relationships. When I see it, it bothers me much more than when I first stood up and said, this wasn't fair, this process. And I was, as the ISKCON ombudsman, following the process. I was requested by a GBC committee to be involved. So I was. I probably know more about that case than anybody. Again, to repeat, I'm not saying innocent or guilty. I'm saying the process. Was it fair? Absolutely. I'll stand in front of the deities and say, no way, impossible. Was it fair? Now, and I saw friends, I thought people were friends of mine, writing all kinds of things on the internet that were like crazy. Like I was a headmaster of a Gurukula when the headmaster blooped, and they were saying I was the one that hired him. I never even knew what the guy looked like. But they were saying things like this. And then I realized that in one of the symptoms of Kali Yuga is disinformation. And if we read the 12th canto about what Kali Yuga looks like, we can see that that truthfulness is fading. The bull of Dharma has 4 legs. The last leg left is a little bit of truthfulness. That's the last leg. Cleanliness, austerity, mercy. They're been chipped away. A little bit of truthfulness left. And when that truthfulness fades away, we know we're in Kali Yuga. So I realize it's Kali Yuga. I try not to hold bitterness towards these people. I feel bad for them, but I also won't hang out with them. If they want my association, they're going to have to behave differently. So that's a long answer, but I think it's an important question, because in this modern day of internet truth, it's important that we not get sucked up into the internet gossip. Prabhupada warned many times that one of the biggest dangers for devotees' own spiritual life, each one of your spiritual life, is called Gramya Gata. Gramya Gata means gossip. One time Prabhupada walked by an ashram in Denver and he heard the brahmacharis gossiping about a sannyas who was having trouble. He couldn't chant his rounds. He had some trouble. People have troubles. Instead of being merciful, they were gossiping about it. And Prabhupada was furious. He said, he will hear about this and then he'll have to go away. And Prabhupada was furious. So this internet has turned into a big gossip column. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya is instructing Sanatana Goswami. And one of the instructions in Madhya Lila, volume 8, in the purports, Prabhupada's talking about, do not get involved in these mundane gossip activities. He said it is a major source of spiritual weakness. And now the internet is the largest gossip column that we could ever imagine. It used to be in the newspapers like the New York Daily News or the Post. One of the popular columns was the gossip column. And the gossip columnist would write, oh, did you know we saw so-and-so famous actor with so-and-so actress at this restaurant. And we saw this person with that person. And this person's married, but we saw him with that other person. And the gossip column would go on. They list all the gossip. And that was one of the most popular, not in the New York Times, but in the sort of lower echelon newspapers. It was one of the most popular columns. Now the whole internet is a gossip column. So I don't look much at Facebook. If somebody is writing stuff that disturbs me, I just unfriend them. I look at Facebook to get good news and find out sometimes how my friends are doing and who's sick and who's well and who has a birthday that I'd really like to congratulate them on. So I'm sorry to give a long-winded answer to this, but Sahadev, you never fail to amaze me with your good questions, so you deserve a good answer.
Well, thank you, Prabhuji. I think the answer actually satisfies my second question, so I rest my second question. Thank you so much. Prabhuji.
Okay, thanks for asking that, Sahadev.
I appreciate
And I know I went on a little, but your question is so important to me, not because I get criticized or not. At this point in my life, at my age, I don't care anymore. But it ruins the movement. There's nothing that ruins the movement more than gossip. And if somebody's having trouble, God, let's help them. Let's not just be like flies, looking for wounds. It's what ruins the movement. And there's a lot of that. And it's a natural tendency. It's the natural tendency. Like, for example, I'll give you a natural tendency. Every one of you, and I'm not trying to insult anyone, but any one of you, if you take the long flight to India like I did, the 32 hours, my original flight, because flights had to stop a lot, 32 hours in the same seat, when you get there, you really don't smell very well. And that applies to every one of you. No matter how much deodorant you stick on, after 32 hours in the same seat, you're not going to smell very well. It's just the reality of the human experience. So what do we do as Vaishnavas? We know that. So we shower once, twice, 3 times a day. We do things to keep clean. Well, if we want to keep our mind clean, then we have to avoid gossip. It's what contaminates the mind, just as it's muchi of the mind. And it's a tendency. The body is going to get stinky if you don't clean it. And if you don't work on cleaning the mind, it will also get stinky. It's just the human experience. And in Kali Yuga with the internet, it's so much easier. Now, when America was founded, there were more newspapers per capita in the Revolutionary War time than any other place in the world. And most of the newspapers, what we call yellow journalism, they were written by pseudonyms, Hamilton, Jefferson, Adams. They would all write columns, but not under their own name. That was standard practice. Criticizing the other one, publishing gossip, attacking with falsehoods. America was founded with an internet. And if you read American history, which I do a lot of, you will see that we were founded on the principle of free journalism but also of no very little libel. There were no libel laws then. And it was just, we were found that way. There's something in America about freedom of speech combined with freedom to gossip. So that's there. It's the American story. We as devotees have to be like the lotus flower above the water. We got to be above it. If not, there was a famous American comic strip that had a saying that I love. And the saying goes like this: we have met the enemy. It is us. That's Pogo, for those who know the comic strip. So to avoid being that enemy, we have to rise above gossip. God, I got a soapbox here, didn't I?
Yes, you did. I have a question. I have a question for you. Sanatana Goswami said that if somebody praises you, they're your enemy. So what is the option? The option is, I don't think the option is to be neutral. The option is to criticize. Someone who criticizes you is your friend. So how do you consider that gossip? Even if it is true or not true, that doesn't matter. Just the fact of criticizing puts you in a position where you actually will, maybe the proclivity for gossip may come out. So
well, I'm going to go look back at the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and you will find when the devotees meet each other and talk about each other, there is constant praise and humility and appreciation. The nice thing about the CC, and I try to read that every day, I just love the CC, is it's modern. It takes place when Vasco da Gama was discovering Goa, when when America was being founded by Columbus. It takes place in modern history. It's a very modern book. And so we can relate to the relations of devotees in a more modern scene, as opposed to, let's say, the Bhagavatam, which is ancient times, a different culture. We might not be able to tune right into it. And when we get into the CC, we find everyone is always praising everyone constantly. So yes, we think that the person who praises me is not doing me a favor because it can go to my head, but that person has a duty to do the praising. So our duty is to praise our God brothers and God sisters and God nieces and nephews and uncles and aunts and cousins. And our business is to appreciate the one quality that Prabhupada had, that anyone who knew him intimately saw this. You can't be with Prabhupada and not see this, is that whoever came to him, he saw the good. There was one story. One devotee came, he became Prabhupada's Sanskrit secretary. And he was good at Sanskrit. And Prabhupada said, do not read certain books. There are books critical, believe it or not. It's his birthday today, but of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. Silly critical books. Oh, his guru didn't do a certain ritual, so therefore his initiation wasn't valid. It was just silly, silly things. Samartana Brahman, the best you could say. But the Samartana Brahmins wanted to actually kill Bhakti Siddhanta. They went to bribe a police chief, and he said, I take bribes, but I won't do that for a saintly person, and warned Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati about it. So this devotee read the books Prabhupada told him not to read. And then he went and started criticizing Bhakti Siddhanta in ISKCON temples, Prabhupada's own guru. Probably one of the most horrible Vaishnava opera activities I've ever heard of. And Prabhupada did something he only did once that I ever saw. Sent out a letter to all the temples, so-and-so has become an envious snake. Stay away from him. Avoid his association. Most devotees from my generation know that story. It's an extremely well-known story. What very few devotees know is the rest of the story, as those of you who know Paul Harvey used to say. Anyway, most devout people don't know the rest of the story, but I'll tell you the rest of the story. A month later, Prabhupada sent him a letter, all forgiven, come be my secretary again. So the only time Prabhupada really criticized strongly like that was to protect the devotees. Like Prabhupada would sometimes criticize his god brothers, but just to protect us. At the end of his life, Prabhupada kept apologizing. You know, I've been a feisty guy and I criticized you. And they said, oh, no offense. But he did it to protect us because we were so vulnerable. So to protect someone, sometimes it's necessary. And leaders, they have to criticize because it's their job to train. But generally, our business is to appreciate the good in each and every devotee. And those who are with Prabhupada, and you read Vishaka's book, you read Mukunda Maharaj's book, and Shama Sundar's Chasing the Rhino, you read any of these books, you're going to get all the same impression how Prabhupada just saw the good. He saw the good in people. He would chastise to the extent it was necessary, like with a child. You don't want him getting run over by a car, so he runs in the street, you slap his wrist. But it was always out of love. And even when Prabhupada would get angry, when people would do the stupidest things. One time in Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who was one of the best devotees of the movement, but he made some mistakes. And one of them was he realized that it's impossible to buy the Juhu land. That Nair bribed every government official, will never buy that land, and he gave the title back to Nair. It's not worth the effort. When Prabhupada heard, he flew into Bombay and was able to save it and keep the land. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was mortified that Prabhupada had to fly in from where he was, save the day after that mistake. And Prabhupada hardly mentioned it to him. Didn't even hardly mentioned it. Because he saw it as one of the most sincere, best preachers he has, and he made a mistake. So Prabhupada came, okay, I'll fix it. So that's the attitude. Now, if you're a temple president or you're a temple commander, you're a GBC, sometimes you must criticize because it's the only way, to teach people. But it has to be done with reluctance and with love. And I found that. And Prabhupada, there's a story, maybe not time tonight, where Prabhupada very subtly and very effectively criticized me when I became very proud. And he knew what he was doing. And he did it with such expertise that probably no one else in the room knew what he was doing. But I can tell you, I knew what he was doing. So I hope that answers your question, Sarvabhauma. It's a very, very important question.
Actually, Bhaktisiddhanta said that he had the most ungrateful and miserable job because he, as his part of his job description, he had to criticize his disciples.
Yeah.
Which he didn't. And he said, this is a terrible thing. You're all very fortunate that you don't have to do that yourselves. So
I hated when I was an ISKCON manager and had to criticize people. I had to do it. Now I run a BI, but it's different. We're a bunch of nerds working together. It's a different thing. And it's Brahminical service. So you can't manage Brahmins anyway. It's like herding cats. You can only facilitate them. It's a different world. So, but I had to do it, and I suffered from it. It's not a joy. Those who I know some devotees, no names mentioned, or sort of devotees, who enjoy writing gossip columns about all the faults of anybody on the internet. And they're horrible. And when new devotees come and tell me about it, I say, don't read it. It will ruin your whole life. It will ruin it. It's called the mad elephant offense. When a mad elephant, it doesn't care for anything. It just ruins everything. Yeah, this is a good point, Sarvabhauma. So I think we're coming to the end of things. I've been going on a long time. Nobody's fallen asleep yet, which is a good sign. Once I gave a class, and this one young man at Krishna House came to me and said, Brahmatirtha, I really liked your class. And he gave me the rarest of compliments. So rare. Maybe none of you have ever received this compliment. Maybe you'd like to hear what it was. It was so rare. I know Sahadev knows this. And he said, I said, what did you like about the class? He'd been there 2 months. He said, I didn't fall asleep once. So I bless you all that you can give a class and get that compliment.
I think it's a good point to end this, at least temporarily, before we fall asleep, I would say.
Yeah.
I would like to thank you in my name and Divya's name, the name of every devotee, for agreeing to talk to us. I would like to the devotees to unmute themselves and acknowledge this personally.
And turn on your cameras if you can. I'd like to see you. Yes, so many nice faces there. Look at these nice faces.
Brahmatirtha Prabhu, my name is Surapal, and I would like to thank you so much for this wonderful Sadashara discussion. Thank you so much. It was nectarian informations.
My pleasure. What's your name?
My name is Surapal Das.
Where are you from?
I'm originally from Poland, but
Okay.
I live in State College, Pennsylvania.
Very good. This one guy went to an eye doctor, a Polish guy in America, and the eye chart said XYZ and the optometrist said to him, "Can you read that line?" And he said, "Yes, but that's my cousin's name." Sorry about that. I couldn't help that. Okay. Nice to meet you. That's okay. My grandparents are Polish too, so I'm into it.
So please express your gratitude. Mute yourselves.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You want to say anything?
Very good. Nice to see
Also,
you all
thank
in
you,
blue
Mother.
grade, especially after such a long time.
Thank you for the class.
Oh, what a cutie.
That's cute.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Also, thank
Prabhu,
you
I
so
would like to share one more pastime about, not lifetime, but I just really want to send appreciation to your book, Perfect Question, Perfect Answer. I'm in sure Prabhupada books, but when I was going on Sankirtan, that was one of my favorite books to give to people.
Thank you.
And also especially those who are a little bit like in distress or in poverty, like those homeless, some people. And because I would tell her, if you read this book, you will get out of the situation. Because the first chapter, there was a section about you pray to Krishna to be rich, then he will fulfill it. But so yeah, that was, I have a few pastime giving this book to a few homeless people, and they didn't have any money, but they would go back people for money to give me for the books. So yeah, I just want to say and share my heartfelt gratitude for the existence of that book, and I also really like that book.
Thank you for your kind words, much appreciated. Okay, thank you all very much. Nice to see you all. I hope you stay healthy and warm, and tell Gorni Tai I miss him.
Don't come and see.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.